Hello all and welcome to the Science Tuition Academy. Today's lesson is on the nervous system. Okay, so first of all, have a look at this diagram. This is a picture of parts of the nervous system, and just have a look at it for a minute and just see if there's anything you can see which belongs to the nervous system or anything that you can identify. Hopefully, you can see a brain, which of course is absolutely central to the nervous system, hence why we call it the central nervous system. You can see the eyes, which are sense organs. Hopefully, you will be able to make out the spinal cord, which is very, very important. And of course, we've got all of these nerves coming out of the spinal cord and brain, which are called the peripheral nerves. And as you know, the role or the function or the job of the nervous system is control or coordination, is another word that's also used. It's also for communication. So, of course, different parts of the body can communicate with each other, and the brain can control lots of parts of the body, for instance, to get them to move. And also, another important thing is to detect things that are happening around us. Okay, more on that later. The next thing I'd like you to do very quickly is just have a look at these pictures, because these pictures will lead into the next task, which is all about sense organs. So just have a look at picture one, picture two, have a think about what it's showing, picture three, picture four, and picture five. What is the sense organ and what is actually being sensed? Okay, what we're now going to do is we are going to insert that information into this table. So there are three columns on this table. The first column is the actual common name of the sense. The second column is the actual sense organ, which you will have to identify, which is involved in the sensing. And the third column is the stimulus. Now, a stimulus is the change in the surroundings that the sense organ is actually picking up. So, for example, stimuli are things like, so stimuli is the plural for stimulus. Stimuli are things like light and colors. Have a think about what the sense organ is that is picking that information up and what the common word for that sense is. Smells or chemicals. So, smells are literally molecules of chemicals traveling through the air and up our nose. Sound, flavors in food, which again themselves are chemicals. Pressure and temperature, and change of direction. So, pause the video and fill the table in, and then we will go through the answers. Okay, pause now. Okay, going through the answers, and here we are. So, for light and colors, working backwards, the sense organ is the eye, and the sense is called sight or seeing. For or vision, even for smells, the sense organ is the nose, and the sense is called your sense of smell. You may have also heard of the word olfactory, but you don't need to know that. The stimulus is sound, the sense organ is the ears or are the ears, and the sense is hearing. The stimulus is flavors, which are chemicals, and the sense organ is the tongue. And on your tongue, you of course have taste buds, more on those later, and the sense is taste. The stimulus is pressure and temperature. Another word for pressure is touch as well. And the sense organ is the skin, and the sense is touch, and of course, the sense of hot and cold, or in between. The stimulus is change of direction. The sense organ is actually the ears. There are three semicircular canals which have a liquid in, which tells us whether we are balanced. So, in other words, our posture, our sense of balance, when you're riding a bike, when you are walking in a straight line upright, when you are just standing upright as opposed to sort of, bending to one side. Your brain can tell from the ears whether you are balanced or not. Okay, and it's that liquid actually, which for those of you who get travel sick on long coach journeys or bus journeys, it's the vibration of the coach which is making that liquid vibrate, which is sending signals to the brain, confusing signals. Similar thing happens when um, you go on a ride at Alton Towers or some other theme park, or you spin round and round and round. The liquid sloshes all over the place, sending confusing signals to your brain, making you dizzy. Okay, so if you do get travel sick, try not to look out of a side window. Try to sit at the front of a coach or bus or car if possible and look straight ahead, okay, rather than at passing images, passing countryside, which can also cause your brain to make you dizzy. Okay, moving on. So, having completed the basic senses and sense organs, let's move on a little bit further. At GCSE, you have to know the nervous system and the parts of the nervous system. Now, the main part of the nervous system is called the central nervous system. And this is absolutely central to the nervous system and control. And this is the brain and the spinal cord, which comes out of the bottom of the brain and it goes all the way down your back. It's obviously protected by your spine or your vertebral column or backbone, and it's got thousands and thousands and thousands of nerve cells in the spinal cord has. So what do the brain and spinal cord actually do, and why are they called the central nervous system? It's because they receive messages or information from other parts of the body and from your surroundings around you, and they collect all that information and they decide how to respond. Do take note, we don't use the word messages at GCSE level. We use the word electrical impulses, so we'll be using that word a lot later on. So this is the central nervous system. It's the brain and the spinal cord, and they have been known to ask that in exam questions. The rest of the nervous system outside of the brain and spinal cord is called the peripheral nervous system. So this is all the nerves that go down your arms, go to your lungs and heart, go to your digestive system, go to your groin, go to your legs, all the way down your legs to your toes. Okay, they are called the peripheral nervous system. Periphery means like on the outside, like peripheral vision, for instance. So that is the central nervous system, and that is the peripheral nervous system, which gathers information and causes those responses. More on that later on. So please do make sure you've made a note on that. Okay, the next term we're going to use is the word neuron. Now, there are lots and lots of very, very important words or terminology that we're going to be meeting in this lesson, which are absolutely essential for GCSE. So, what we've done is made these words as easy as possible. Okay, using the simplest definitions and using simple diagrams. Okay, so first of all, what is the difference between a nerve and a neuron? Okay, a nerve is basically a big bundle of wires. Okay, so a nerve is like a cable like you might have cables coming into your house, carrying, your internet connection or carrying electricity. Um, so the nerve is like a big cable, and the individual wires inside it are called neurons. So a neuron is a individual long nerve cell. Okay, a neuron is a individual nerve cell. Okay, and they're long and they carry electrical impulses. That word that we did use. So I'm just going to write on here an individual nerve cell. Okay, they are specialized cells, so they actually have a function, which is to carry electrical impulses or signals. Um, and they are long, and there are lots of them in the nerves. So if you think about your nerve going down your arm, obviously it branches off into lots of branches. So there are sort of smaller and smaller nerves going to each of your fingertips and to every other part of your arm, including the biceps, triceps, elbows, etc., and the skin. But what you have coming out of those nerves is lots and lots of neurons which go to their individual destination. It's a bit like you have lots of arteries coming out of your aorta, or it's a bit like you have lots of roads coming off motorways. Okay, so we are going to use the word neuron. They also call it neuron, more particularly in America. We're going to use the term neuron for nerve cells. Okay, so hopefully you have made a note on that. Let's move on. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about receptors. Now, receptors are cells that pick up the information or stimuli or stimulus. Okay, now they are the first part of the nervous system to pick up any information. Now, that information could be something flying towards you, like a bee. That information or stimuli could be pain in your stomach or in your feet. That information could be you can smell food being cooked, or it could be someone prodding you in the back. Okay, so all of this information or stimuli is first picked up by receptors. Now, you will remember that early on in your childhood, you may have gone to reception, okay, which is where you had your first classes at school. Or reception is the very first part of a school building or hospital building. It's called reception. It's the first place you go to. In the same way, the information or stimuli is picked up, first of all, by the receptors. And these are cells that are found in our sense organs. So they are very crucial to our senses. So, for instance, here we have sound receptors, which are in the ear, in this coiled part called the cochleae. We have touch and temperature receptors in the skin, which tell us, the sensation of touch, or, the temperature around us. We have smell receptors in the nose. We have taste receptors called taste buds, which tell us whether what we are eating is sweet or sour or salty or bitter. And we have light receptors at the back of the eye in the retina. Okay. And these, of course, will tell our brain where the color of the object that we're looking at, but also they, of course, bring in light with the image of whatever we are looking at. Okay, more on that later. So these are our sensory receptors. Okay, now there are three other key words. Well, one of those is receptor. The first word, and these are definitions which you absolutely must know. So you must write these down and you must learn them off by heart. So that involves memory. Okay, we're not just talking about short-term memory, like learn it for tomorrow. We're saying learn it so that you remember it after a few months, after a year, and so on. So the first word is stimulus or stimuli. A stimulus is a change in the surroundings that our sense organs detect. A change in the environment or surroundings around us that our sense organs detect, e.g., light, smell, taste, touch, and so on. The second word that we need to know is receptor. A receptor is a cell, like a taste bud or touch receptor in the skin, a cell inside a sense organ that detects the stimulus and sends an electrical impulse along the neurons to the brain and spinal cord. So, examples of receptors are temperature receptors in the skin, light receptors at the back of the eye, sound receptors inside the ear, as we saw earlier. And the last word we need to know is the word effector. An effector brings about an effect. So an effector is always a muscle or a gland that brings about an effect, or at GCSE we say a response. For instance, if you touch a hot object like a hot frying pan, then your biceps, which are your arm muscles, will withdraw. So, in other words, they respond. They are effectors. They bring about a response. Okay. If your if your eye is itching, then your eyelid might twitch, or you might be blinking a lot. Okay, for instance. So this is a response. Okay, and the muscle or the gland that brings about the response is called an effector. So by all means, please pause the video so that you can write down the keywords. Okay, if you have written them down, let's move on and let's go even deeper and deeper to get an absolutely deep understanding of this topic. Okay, so the first thing now, where it gets a little bit complicated, is we need to actually look at the nerve pathways or neuronal pathways. Okay, so I've made this diagram for you, which shows you the following. Okay, and more on this when we study reflexes. Okay, so let's just pretend for a moment that you have touched a hot object. Now, obviously, your brain does not want your skin or your fingers to burn. Okay, so the first thing is you have a receptor in your skin which picks up the stimulus. The stimulus is the hot object, it's the high temperature, and the receptor is a temperature receptor in your skin. So, what happens? First of all, what happens is that, let me get my pen out. First of all, is that an electrical impulse travels from the receptor down a sensory neuron. Okay, now there are three neurons or nerve cells that we need to know about. The first one, they are in order, is the sensory neuron. So we have an electrical impulse go from the receptor where the electrical impulses start. These are cells inside the sense organs. And the electrical impulse travels across the sensory neuron and it goes into the spinal cord and it goes to the next neuron, which is called a relay neuron. This relays or carries the information across as an electrical impulse to the motor neuron. The motor neuron carries an electrical impulse to the effector, which in the case of touching a hot pan would be your arm muscles, and your arm muscles, which would be the effector, would contract. And so let's put that in arm muscles like the biceps, which would contract, the triceps would relax, and your arm would withdraw and pull away, causing a response. Okay, so we've gone from stimulus to response, and also as the electrical impulse is passing along the relay neuron, after a brief delay, it will also go up to the brain. When we say delay, we're talking about milliseconds. It will go up to the brain, and then your brain will realize, oh, I've uh, I've burnt myself. Okay, or oh, that was hot. Okay, or you might actually say something else if you touch a hot pan without realizing. Okay, so this is the loop that we're following, or the neuronal pathway. So first of all, the electrical impulses go down a sensory neuron, then a relay neuron, and then a motor neuron from the receptor, which picks up the stimulus, to the effector, which produces the response. Okay, more on this later. We will come back to it, but I wanted to give you a general overview before we go deeper of how the nervous system actually works. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on. And next, this is a written piece on how the nervous system works. And by all means, pause and make notes. It detects changes around us called stimuli using receptors, which are cells in our sense organs. The electrical impulses are sent from the receptors to the brain and spinal cord, and then to muscles and glands called effectors. The effectors cause a response, e.g., like pulling your hand away from a flame or a hot surface, something we'll look at further on, plus also even further next lesson. By all means, at any point of the recorded video, do press pause if you want to read something again and jot anything down. Okay, moving on. So a reminder, and not just a reminder, but let's go in a little bit further so that you don't have any issues in understanding. We said that an effector was a part of your body that responds to a stimulus. Okay, somebody might be lighting a fire outside, and your eyes take in the smoke and start to water. That is a response. Okay. Um, so you've got tear glands in your eyes that get irritated and start producing tears to wash away the smoke particles from the surface of the eye. Somebody might bring in a tray of food, and you smell the food, you see the food, it looks delicious, and your salivary gland, which is just underneath your tongue in your mouth, will start to produce saliva. Okay, or secrete is the word we often use at GCSE. Secrete means to produce and release. So salivary glands respond to a stimulus of food by secreting saliva. If you've touched a hot radiator, the muscles in your arm contract and pull your hand away. Okay. If you've got a bee buzzing around your eye, you will blink. Okay. So these are the two different effectors. An effector is always a muscle that contracts. Remember to always think of the word contracts when you think about muscles. Okay, because that word contract or contraction is almost always worth a mark. So muscles contract and glands secrete. Okay, and these are the two sorts of parts of your body that respond. Okay, and they're called effectors. Moving on. Right, I have two exam questions. The first one is worth 2 marks. The second one is worth 4 marks. Read the questions, answer them, and then I'll go through the answer. So pause now. Okay, we're going to unpause now and go through the answers. Number one, what is the function of receptors in the skin? Receptors in the skin detect changes in surroundings called stimuli. These would be touch or pressure and temperature. They convert this information into electrical impulses. So, receptors in the skin, first you've identified them, touch or pressure and temperature, and then you've said what they do. They detect the changes and they convert it into electrical impulses. The second question, there are two different types of effector. Identify the two types of effector and describe the response each effector makes. So the two effectors are muscles and glands. Muscle responds to stimuli by contracting. Glands respond to stimuli by secreting or releasing or producing hormones or chemicals. Okay, and those chemicals could be enzymes as well, such as produced by the salivary gland. Okay, so do pause the video if you need to get anything down. Otherwise, if you're happy, we will move on. Right, so what does a neuron actually look like? It looks like a tree essentially with little branches that either pass information on or they collect information. Usually they collect information, these little branches, and they pass them on the long part of the neuron, which is called an axon. Okay, now at GCSE, you don't really need to know that term axon. Okay, but it's the long part of the neuron. Okay, and normally it's attached to a receptor or to a receptor in a sense organ or to a muscle or effector. Now, just a reminder, a neuron is an actual cell. Okay, so yes, it might be specialized because it's got a long part of the cell. It's also got these dendrites or connections with other nerve cells. But essentially, because it is a neuron and because it is a cell, it will have a nucleus, it will have cytoplasm, it will have a cell membrane, and it will also have, let me just add some more labels. So it will have a membrane and it will also have ribosomes and mitochondria for energy. Okay, and ribosomes for making proteins. So, in other words, a neuron is actually an animal cell and it's a specialized cell. It's got all of these structures, okay, even though its features look different. Now, why am I saying this? Because, of course, there have been exam questions in the past where they've asked you to label a neuron. And some students are thinking, well, I don't know how to label it. My teacher never taught me this. And they are after labels like nucleus, cytoplasm, membrane, because of course it's easy to forget that a neuron is a specialized type of an animal cell. Okay, moving on. Next, right. There are three types of neurons. Write these down. Sensory, relay, and motor neuron. Now, I'll show you that diagram again because one of the things you will notice is that sensory neurons are outside the spinal cord or brain. Motor neurons are outside the spinal cord or brain, but relay neurons are actually in the central nervous system. They are in the spinal cord and the brain, and they connect the sensory and motor neurons together. So once you've written the three types of neurons down, by all means, pause if you need to. Let me show you this diagram. Okay, so sensory neuron first, then relay, and then motor neuron. So the sensory neuron carries electrical impulses, we said, into the spinal cord. The relay neuron will, of course, connect to the motor neuron and pass the electrical impulses on. And then the motor neuron will take the electrical impulses away to the effector, which is a muscle or a gland. So notice that these relay neurons are entirely within the spinal cord. And of course, your brain is also made up of relay neurons. We call them brain cells, actually. Okay. And they connect the information coming in to the information going out. Okay. So this is the structure of the central system in a very, very simple way. Don't worry about the brown parts of the spinal cord and the white parts of the spinal cord. They're not really brown and white. They are actually called they're called the white matter, so they are white, and the gray matter. Okay, but you don't need to know that. Okay, so this is how the central nervous system, that's the spinal cord, and the brain receive information from sensory neurons and they pass it on to motor neurons in order to respond. And they do all this in milliseconds, thousands and thousands of times a second. Okay, the brain is getting information from inside and from outside. So that is a plan of how the nervous system actually works. And you do need to remember all of the words on this slide from stimulus all the way to response. Now, I'm going to show you how a reflex is built up. So this is a reflex pathway. More on this next lesson. But this is basically, and I'm going to use the example of touching a hot flame. Okay, because that's a very, very common example. Other examples could be stepping on a pin, for instance. We'll have a look at that later. So you've touched a hot candle. And so, first of all, you've got your stimulus, which is a hot temperature. That's picked up by a receptor in the skin. The receptor sends electrical impulses down a sensory neuron, or a longer sensory neuron is another way of saying it. That passes the electrical impulses to a relay neuron. Doesn't go to the brain first of all, goes to the brain after, because you want to pull your hand away from the flame, not stand there thinking, okay, do I pull my hand away or not? Okay, so the electrical impulses go from the sensory neuron straight into the relay neuron to the brain afterwards, and then to the motor neuron. So these neurons can conduct electrical impulses, just like wire carries electrical current. Then the impulse, the electrical impulse, goes from the motor neuron to an effector. The effector in this instance will be the hand and arm muscles, and you will get a response, and you will quickly pull your hand away, okay, away from the flame. All right, this is called a reflex because it's a really fast action that you don't need to think about. Okay, and it's automatic and it's designed to protect you. And it starts off with the stimulus of a hot candle and it finishes with a response of quickly pulling your hand away. Now, first of all, your first thing is that you've got to remember the order of the um, neurons. So one way of doing that is to use SRM, if you can remember that SRM. So that's the first thing. Okay. Now, the question I wanted to ask you is where are the relay neurons found? Just have a think for a moment in your head. Where are the relay neurons found? So hopefully you've been able to recall that the relay neurons are found inside the spinal cord. Okay, they take the electrical impulses from the sensory neuron, pass it on to the motor neuron, and later on, they also pass that information up to the brain. Okay, so it can make sense of what's actually happened. You have burnt your hand. So you pull your hand away without even having to think about it. Okay, so the sensory neuron goes from the receptor to the spinal cord, and the motor neuron goes from the spinal cord to a muscle. Okay, you don't need to worry too much about their shapes. So remember, SRM, sensory, relay, and motor. And if you want a silly sentence or mnemonic in order to remember the whole pathway, 7 rabbits swiftly run, munching every raspberry. Have a think what you might be able to work out that might stand for. Okay. S for 7 or stimulus. R, rabbits for receptor. S for swiftly or sensory neuron. R for relay neuron. M for motor neuron. E for effector. R for response. 7 rabbits swiftly run, munching every raspberry. So we have, once more, stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector, and response. Okay, so you might find that useful. Okay, multiple choice quiz then. Okay, put number 1 in the margin. How many types of neuron are there? I will give you about 10 seconds for each question before I put the answers up. How many types of neuron are there? As we've seen, there are 3. Number 2, which of these would be found inside the central nervous system? Take your time. Would be found inside the central nervous system. And the answer is, of course, the relay neurons. Okay, the others are outside the central nervous system. Number 3, which of these is an effector? So you can see that some of the questions are easy and some of them are more hard. Which of these is an effector? Okay, you will remember an effector is a muscle or a gland that responds. And the answer is, of course, calf muscles. The word muscles gives it away. Number 4. Which of these is not an effector? Which of these is not an effector? Okay, and the answer, of course, is D. Why is it D? Just try and justify that to yourself because an effector is a muscle or a gland. So we have salivary glands that release or secrete saliva. We have bladder muscles. So that's a muscle. It is an effector. It does respond because bladder muscles are the ones that, relax in the toilet. Adrenal glands, they release adrenaline, so they are a gland. And then you've got wrist bones, they don't release anything or contract. Um, so the answer is, of course, D. Number 5, what is the function of a receptor? And the answer, as we saw earlier, And by all means, pause if you need more time. The answer, as we saw earlier, was C. Receptors detect stimuli and they pass electrical impulses to the sensory neuron. Number 6. Which of these are not in the central nervous system? And the answer is, of course, sensory neurons. Okay, the other three, the brain and the spinal cord, and the relay neurons inside them, are part of the central nervous system. Number 7. Which of these are functions of the nervous system? This is the last question. And for this one, there is actually more than one answer. Which of these are functions of the nervous system? Okay, and the answers are as follows: control and coordination, communication, and detecting stimuli. Excretion, which is getting rid of waste, is not really the function of your nervous system. Have a think about how many you got correct out of 7. Hopefully, you've got 7 out of 7 or 6 out of 7 and gained a good understanding, which will only increase further, where we'll look at even more challenging exam questions as we go deeper into the topic. But hope you enjoyed that and you've got a very good understanding of the nervous system and how it's structured. And of course, do go back if you need to revisit anything again. Other than that, thank you very much and please stay with us so you can get even more amazing lessons, which will really, really, really help you in your GCSEs. Other than that, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care and catch up with you next lesson. Thank you and bye.